Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, August the 18th, 2025. Today I do want to briefly go back to the summit in Alaska, in which Vladimir Putin visited the United States, and I've already looked at this event before it happened and made some suggestions, and I want to sort of have another look at it very briefly and consider the chart for when Vladimir Putin actually landed in America. The landing is important in terms of checking the time when you land in a new country, when you go on holiday, when you arrive at the airport. That moment of landing is often the critical moment to look at, and so I think it might be a good idea to look at that moment and to consider what it means. I already suggested that it looked relatively positive, the overall meeting, and has it been a positive meeting? Well, it depends who you ask, and it depends on your perspective. And additionally, I want to consider the horoscope of Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. He has been in the news a lot. He's been president for quite a long time, since I think May the 31st, 2017. And I was looking at the comments on my channel, and at least one person asked about Aleksandar Vučić and wanted me to look at his horoscope. So now might be a good opportunity to do it. But there's always a problem when you're dealing with someone like that who's been in power for such a long time. People who are in power for a long time tend to get hated. It just happens, and they're accused of all sorts of bad things. And in the case of Aleksandar Vučić, there was this major tragedy last year, November the 1st, 2024, in the Serbian city of Novi Sad, when I think the facade of a railway station collapsed, and I think 16 people were killed, and that really undermined his prestige and caused a lot of popular protests. And so I'll be looking at Vučić's chart, and I'll also be trying to look at the horoscope of Serbia. But the question is, what date do you choose? Because there are lots of charts you can use for Serbia. But before I look at all that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is the chart for today. Actually, it's not the chart for today. It's a chart for Vučić and his directions. But let me just switch. Here it is. Here's the chart for today, set for noon, August the 18th, 2025, and set for New York. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So if we set the chart for noon, we see that the moon is at 2812 Gemini. So the moon is getting ready to move into Cancer. And as far as I can see, the moon moves into Cancer at 6:05 in the evening if you are in London or in the UK, sort of early evening if you're in Europe, in other words. And if you're in the Americas, well, this morning, or the moon is certainly in Cancer, and so the moon is certainly in Gemini. So there is a changeover there. And when the moon moves into Cancer, it does make a square of Saturn, does make a square of Neptune. So it's not necessarily such a good thing that the moon is moving into Cancer, even though the moon is moving into its own sign. And of course, when the moon moves into Cancer, it's starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter, and so there is a strong and sort of favourable relationship between moon and Jupiter. The moon is in the sign of Jupiter's exaltation. Jupiter is in the sign of the moon's rulership. So So overall, you could say it's not bad that the moon is moving into a Cancer, but it's just that first degree or two, it's making the square to Saturn, it's making a square to Neptune, and in fact, it's making a square to Mars as well in the end. So probably the first decan of the moon being in Cancer, may not be great. Now, just before the moon moves into Cancer, it makes a sextile with the Sun. And so Moon sextile Sun, as I always say, it's a good aspect. I think I did a video on Moon trine Sun quite recently, and when you've got the Moon making a sextile to the Sun, it suggests that everything is in order. Moon in Gemini plays Sun in Leo. Gemini and Leo, traditionally are two signs that have quite a good relationship with one another. Both are positive, but they're different elements. One fire, one air, and so they're not sort of competing over the same territory. And so, those are the lunar aspects. As far as the non-lunar aspects, we still have Mercury making a sextile to Mars. So Mercury is 7 degrees Leo, making a sextile to Mars. In fact, there is an exact Mercury sextile Mars today. And that, I think, is it, because Mercury and Mars have been moving at similar speeds, but finally Mercury is starting to overtake Mars. If you take Raphael's Ephemeris, there is a section in here. There is a section in here which talks about the daily motions of the planets. So if I look at the daily motions of the planets to the 18th, I can see that Mercury is now moving at 0 degrees 18 minutes a day, and Mars is moving at 38 minutes a day. So Mercury has now very much caught up with Mars and is going faster than Mars, and that Mercury's speed exceeded that of Mars a couple of days ago on over the weekend on Saturday. So Mercury sextile Mars, I'm going to repeat myself. Mercury sextile Mars is about saying what's on our mind. It's about having a vigorous conversation, a vigorous exchange of ideas, and it can also be about our own ideas and how we articulate them and how we think about them. And there are certain things we might just realize we want to do and we want to express them, and we won't take kindly to a situation where we have to keep our ideas to ourselves, where we feel we're being ignored. And if someone is talking nonsense or is wrong, we're going to want to let them know. And additionally, there is a biquintile between the Sun and Neptune. And so Sun biquintile Neptune is about making the conscious effort to go further. And it is a conscious effort. It's not something that comes naturally. So it might be that our lives seem a bit boring and one-dimensional, and so with Sun biquintile Neptune, we might want to do something else. We want to, reach out for something which is beyond ourselves, and so we make the conscious effort. You can, make the conscious effort to get in touch with, higher level forces, for example, and it might seem a bit contrived, but who knows? It might be something that works. Although, I'm not convinced that you can throw money at the problem, by whatever. I suppose you can buy talismans and spiritual objects online, but is that going to work? I don't think it is. I think it's the effort that matters. It's not the money spent. So that might be one way in which Sun biquintile Neptune works. Might also be about art. I mean, Neptune does relate to art and imagination. And so perhaps we can make a conscious effort to harness our imagination. So that might be a way in which Sun biquintile Neptune works. We could, in certain situations, feel that we have to lie, or we have to distort the truth. And it's not a conscious distortion, an unconscious distortion. We have to really think about it. How are we going to deceive someone? How are we going to lie? What methods are we going to be using? So that's a way in which Sun biquintile Neptune is going to work, though I probably wouldn't recommend it. We shouldn't tell lies. We should, try to be honest and upfront. So that's the picture for New York. So if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia instead, Moon is in Gemini, and the Moon is going to be in Gemini all day. So you don't have to worry about Moon going into Cancer if you're in Australia or New Zealand. You don't have to worry about the Moon making a square to Saturn or Neptune. And the Moon in Gemini makes a sextile to the Sun. And as the day progresses, that sextile to the Sun gets stronger. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, it should be a day that's relatively harmonious, and all things being equal, things should be quite smooth. But you've still got the Mercury sextile Mars to consider. So if something bothers you, it might be a good idea to be open about it. And then there is the heliocentric view. So here it is. Venus is still making a conjunction to Uranus. So there it is, Venus conjunct Uranus. So what's Venus conjunct Uranus about? It could say something about how we relate to one another, and looking for something different, looking for a surprise, and we perhaps get the surprise we're looking for. Or it just might be how we want to occur to other people. We just don't want to, get involved in the usual stuff. We don't want to fit in with another person's expectations. And additionally, we have got Mars starting to make a square to Pluto, and we'll have that square to Pluto probably tomorrow as well. So that sort of marks the beginning of this week. Mars square Pluto is about power. Who has the power? Who doesn't have the power? And many of us may feel that we really have to assert ourselves and use our willpower, to get things done. And if we don't use our willpower, if we don't hold firm, then we could be overwhelmed by forces beyond our control. And we've got a conjunction also between Mercury and Chiron. Mercury Chiron, it kind of fits in with the fact that geocentrically we've got Mercury sextile Mars, and I said that Mercury sextile Mars is we want to be open about our opinions. And you could say the same thing with Mercury conjunct Chiron. I mean, Chiron, likes to be the maverick, wants to be different. Doesn't just want to follow the crowd, and we might just have a new way of looking at things which we want to talk about, and we don't care what impact it has. And we can be effective because Mercury is not just making a conjunction to Chiron, but it's making a sextile to the Earth. And so it is a time for saying what's on our mind, for being open and honest. And this also fits in with the fact that the moon is in Gemini for some of the day, perhaps all of the day, certainly if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So that's the overall astrological picture. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, August the 18th, 2025. Aries, you're feeling okay. There's nothing much to worry about, and you can be yourself. So there's no need to hide things. You might worry what people might think if you were to be honest, but I do think that now is a time to be honest. Because Mercury is making a sextile to Mars. Mars is of course your ruler. Mars has been receiving this sextile from Mercury for some time, and today is when the aspect becomes exact. After today, Mercury is now definitely going faster than Mars, so Mercury is going to be pulling away from that sextile. So now might be a really good time to say whatever it is that is on your mind, and people do want to hear. And additionally, you can articulate what's on everyone's mind, what everyone is thinking. And we all have aspirations, however difficult things might be, and you could say that there's a collective aspiration, and you, Aries, are able to pick up on it, with your intuition, and you're further helped by the fact that there is a sextile between the moon and the sun, and so with the moon sextile sun, you know exactly how to behave, and people need some excitement, and they need to see a different view, and you are very much someone who can provide it. And it might be a good time, if you're an Aries, to make suggestions, because maybe no one else is going to be able to make suggestions. They're worried, they're concerned about what people might say, but you're an Aries, you know what to say, and so there is some responsibility there. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, don't forget that Mars is very much in Libra, 7 degrees Libra. It's going to be in Libra for over a month, and so while it's in Libra, you do have to pay some attention to other people, and what other people want and what other people don't want. And so with Mercury sextile Mars, and with Mars in Libra, that tells us more about how this aspect is working. And I do think that you have the opportunity to tell people what they don't want to hear, but let me rephrase that. You can tell people what they do want to hear, but what they're afraid to say. And so you could be the great communicator, and it may be that someone wants to make a suggestion, but they're afraid to make that suggestion, and you're the one who can do it. And as soon as you say the magic words, things really do start to progress very quickly. And so that gives you responsibility, but it's a kind of responsibility that you really can deal with. And if you've got something to say, then say it as early as possible. Don't wait forever. And that's particularly the case if you're in the Americas, because if you are in the Americas, the moon does eventually change sign. I mean, the moon will change sign out of Gemini and into Cancer. It could happen sometime this morning. Now, it's not the end of the world when the moon moves into Cancer, because Mercury will still be sextile Mars, but while the moon is in Gemini, making a sextile to the sun, that's when things really can move on a communication level. And when the moon moves into Cancer, so that's going to be this morning in the Americas, or it could be this morning. Okay, let me rephrase that. It's going to be before lunch. I don't know what time you have lunch, because if you're in the East Coast, in New York, the moon moves into Cancer at 5 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. But if you're in California, it'll be 5 minutes past 10 in the morning. If you're in Chicago, it would be at 5 minutes past noon. So when the moon moves, it does move into Cancer, things are likely to slow down, and it might not be quite so easy to say whatever it is you want to say. And it's not just that the moon is going into quite a low profile sign, it's also starting to making a square to Saturn, and it is a square to Neptune. And so moon square Saturn, it might close things down, and you might find that you have your doubts. You don't want to say it. You're thinking about what could go wrong, and there may be other things to worry about, other things that you regard as being important. And so, if you are in the Americas, there could be quite a rapid change over the course of the day as the moon moves into Cancer. And if you're in Europe, then early evening, the moon goes into Cancer and makes a square to Saturn, and so you've had your chance maybe, and now it's time to be focusing on other things, and you don't really want to cause too much confusion. If you're in Asia or Australasia, it probably doesn't matter. It's a moon in Gemini day, and you've got all day to do whatever you feel you need to do, or all day to say whatever needs to be said. Taurus. The day starts with the moon being in Gemini, and the moon in Gemini makes a sextile to the sun. And this moon sextile sun, Taurus, I would have regarded it as being fairly useful. You're able to concentrate on the things that matter, the things that are important, that perhaps relate to your security and your stability. And don't forget money. Money does matter, but not in a way that is difficult or negative. With moon sextile the sun, there are things you can do to improve your financial situation, and it might be a good time to discuss money. Money can be a subject that people don't want to talk about, but if you do talk about money today, then I think that you're going to make good progress, and you'll be surprised to the upside by how other people respond. So don't shy away from difficult subjects that relate to who has what, who owns what, worrying about whether you're going to get the money that you feel you deserve. If you want to talk about it, I think that it is the right time, and it's going to be okay. And at the same time, Taurus, your verbal skills are very good today. I mean, it is a verbal day. There's no doubt about it, because Mercury is sextile Mars. So whoever you are, whatever your sign, you'll have a way with words. But you in particular, Taurus, you definitely will be able to handle it, and you'll be able to say the right things. And also, it's also about understanding. It's not enough sometimes to just say what's on your mind, to be open, honest, all that kind of thing. You have to have a degree of sensitivity, and right now, I really do think that you have that sensitivity. So you can look after your own interests, you can advocate for your own interests, but also you'll be aware of what other people can deal with, what other people can handle. And so, that allows you to really, get the balance right. Yeah, you don't want to upset anyone, but you know that some things have to be said, and so you're going to be perhaps sort of more sensitive than usual. Now, the moon does eventually go into Cancer. So when the moon goes into Cancer kind of depends. If you're in the Americas, the moon will go into Cancer lunchtime or even earlier. It could be this morning if you're in California or Hawaii or Alaska. If you're in Australasia, well, you don't really have to worry about the moon going into Cancer. But when the moon does go into Cancer, there is a change. And on one hand, when the moon goes into Cancer, you continue to want to say stuff, but you also realize that the atmosphere is changing. That what used to be easy is not now going to be quite so straightforward. And the problem there is that the moon, when it goes into Cancer, it makes a square to Saturn. And so with the moon square Saturn, it could be that there are just things that you weren't worrying about at the beginning of the day, that you were just dismissing or you just were ignoring, but suddenly become real. Or at least you think they're real. And you can no longer be as free as you perhaps were earlier in the day. So that might be how moon square Saturn is working. And it's not just moon square Saturn, it's a moon is making a square to Neptune. And So your words might not come out as fluently as you'd like. So, which is a good reason to say whatever it is. To say whatever it is you've got to say. Say it early, and that especially applies if you're in the Americas. If you're in Europe, you have more leeway, and if you're in Australia, you have complete leeway. So, it is very important to have an early start and not to keep things to yourself for too long. Yeah, certainly if you're in the Americas. But we might just be thinking about your own fears here. I think we probably are. And regardless of what time of day it is, once you actually are able to say things, being open about your ideas, you will immediately have a powerful impression, and people will listen to you, and you will get the balance right. So there is nothing to be afraid of. But I think that there may be times when you are afraid, and that might hold you back. So, I would perhaps recommend that you are brave and you have confidence in yourself, because you'll get it right. Don't worry. And turning to relationships, it could be a similar message. It is a time to be open with other people, even if there have been difficulties in the past. If you are in a relationship with someone and there have been recent tensions and incompatibilities, now might be a good time to address those problems, and you'll be able to talk with conviction, and so will the other person. Mercury is sextile Mars, and you should be very happy to listen to what another person has to say. You may not like what they have to say, but if you're honest with yourself, you'll appreciate that they're being, down to earth and being realistic, and they're being honest. And honesty is something that you should appreciate. Be honest yourself, and when other people are being honest, even if they're being brutally honest, you should be happy about that. Gemini. Mercury is your ruler, and it's still sextile Mars. And today there is an exact sextile between Mercury and Mars. And that's good news. It also means that the Mercury-Mars sextile, which has been active for so long, is reaching peak now, because Mercury is now moving faster than Mars. So that overtake took place on Saturday. That's when Mercury's speed exceeded Mars's speed, and so Mercury makes a sextile, then it moves on. So you could say that today's peak Mercury sextile Mars, especially as the moon is in Gemini. And so the moon is in Gemini for all day. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, if you're in Europe or Africa, then this morning, this afternoon, the whole working day, it's in Gemini. If you're in Americas, well, this morning it's in Gemini, but by lunchtime it will have moved on. So do take advantage of that ability to speak and to be clear, open, honest. I'm saying this to everyone because you think that with astrology we think of the 12 signs, and one sort of divides them up, and each of the 12 signs is going to have different experiences. But in many cases, that's not true. In a perfect world, I'd probably say that the best way to do astrology is to forget about the 12 signs and just to generically talk about what is going on astrologically. And so that's something I think I do need to say. But we have to deal with what people expect. People do expect some kind of categorization. And so the categorization, I'm talking to you as a Gemini, and it's true that Mercury is your ruler, and so it's sextile Mars. So that Mercury sextile Mars, while it impacts everyone, it probably impacts you more than other people, especially as the moon is in Gemini. And so, whatever it is you want to communicate, do say it, but don't do it too seriously. It's not like saying, oh, well, we've got to have a serious conversation. We've got to do it at a particular time, and it shouldn't be like that. It should be as spontaneous as possible, and part of your job, even if it's something that appears serious, part of your job is to amuse, make people feel relaxed and happy, and give them the view that there's very interesting things going on which they want to be part of, and perhaps some people just don't have the imagination to see how interesting and fun things could be. But you, Gemini, you do have that imagination, and so give people the benefit of it, and you can be pushy. Mercury is sextile Mars. You can advocate for particular courses of action, and people will, I think, in most cases, take you seriously. Now, the moon does move into Cancer eventually, and so when the moon moves into Cancer, that may represent a change, and particularly when the moon moves into Cancer, it makes a sextile to Saturn, and it makes a square to Saturn and a square to Neptune, and that may indicate some kind of block. You can get on with people up to a point. Maybe you make one suggestion too many. Maybe you make a suggestion too late. Maybe you miss a moment. Maybe you get your timing wrong. But when the moon makes a square to Saturn, you might suddenly find that you hit a brick wall. What was easy suddenly becomes really difficult. Some people stop being responsive, and don't worry about it. It just means that it's going to be more difficult because that Mercury sextile Mars is still around. So Mercury sextile Mars, it is a sextile. There is a bit of effort to a sextile. Remember, a sextile is 3 times 2. It has the ease of a number 3, of the trine, but it also has the difficulty and the tension of the number 2, which is the opposition. And so if you do appear to be hitting a brick wall, people aren't listening, well, just keep going and just keep talking. And that might be the way to make progress, to eventually have an impact. And as far as the overall day is concerned, I've given you the picture. But one aspect to today which I haven't mentioned is that what you're really looking for at the moment is you want freedom. Freedom's really important for Geminis right now, and there just might be something that you feel is just holding you back, and you want to get rid of it. And today you can. And perhaps the best way of freeing yourself from something bothering you, is to be open and honest, being very clear about what you feel. You might be expecting opposition, you might be expecting someone to put their foot down, but if you're open and honest, you might, to your surprise, find that it's all very easy, that you don't get the resistance you were expecting. Cancer. At the moment, Cancer, well, you're still benefiting from that conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. Really make the most of this conjunction. It is, over 6 degrees apart, but one can probably allow an 8-degree orb, or you might even say, well, Venus and Jupiter are still in your sign. So if Venus and Jupiter are still in your sign, well, you still, to an extent, benefit from them. But while they're conjunct, while they're still at least within 8 degrees of one another, the benefit is very real. And you could argue that the peak moment for Venus and Jupiter, for that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, is not over a week ago when they were exact. It's when you've got a third planet coming in and making a conjunction to them, and that third planet is the moon, and the moon is getting ready to move into your sign. The moon moves into Cancer early in the day if you're in the Americas, and so it starts moving towards Jupiter. It starts moving towards Venus, and if you're not in the Americas, well, okay, it might be later in the day, it might be tomorrow, but the point is, regardless of signs, the moon is moving towards a conjunction with Venus and Jupiter over the next couple of days. And so perhaps all the benefits of Venus and Jupiter for you still haven't felt them. You might have been feeling somewhat disappointed. Maybe you felt that there was an opportunity and the opportunity had passed, but don't worry, things are coming together again. And so that in fact is something to look forward to. And so don't doubt yourself, and don't think that you've missed an opportunity, because you absolutely haven't. And moon moving into Cancer, it's going to be great. I mean, it goes into Cancer, of course, every month, but this time round it's in proximity to Jupiter and Venus, so it really is a time to really make the most of things. And you might think that the Cancer season has been over for a long time, but the Cancer season is it's about to give you a final blast, and so that does look good. And don't worry if today appears to get off to a slow start. First impressions can be misleading, and it might be a slow start, but it's not an uncomfortable start. Slow but reassuring, and the moon is making a sextile to the sun, and that is a great aspect. You are aware that there's going to be a new moon in less than a week, and so this moon sextile the sun, it's one of the last major aspects of this lunar cycle, and it's a fortunate aspect. And so if you think about it, you've done what you can, you're in tune with things, and you're getting ready for a change, you're getting ready for that new moon. And I think in many cases you have sorted things out, and things are looking good. And Cancer, don't forget the practical side of things, because Mercury is making a sextile to Mars, and this Mercury sextile Mars, it's an aspect that for you can be about things like money and security and making sure that everything is sorted out. Now that doesn't sound right, does it? Because you're dealing with Mercury in Leo, sextile Mars in Libra. It doesn't sound very grounded, but I'm talking about it and how it affects you as a Cancerian. And I think that you're going to be able to use the energy of that Mercury sextile Mars, and hopefully you have been already using that energy to make sure that everything is above board. And if you don't like the way something is, you don't like the way people are behaving, or you feel that something is owed to you, then now's the time that you can be absolutely honest about it. And you don't have to do it by shouting, by using capital letters. You can just tell people what's true and explain it to them, and you'll be able to do it in such a way that is really very easygoing and harmonious, and you can explain the home truths, and you'll reach a situation where if anyone opposes you or doesn't want to do what you suggest, then they would appear unreasonable. So don't be shy. And if something needs to be said, Cancer, even if it's on a subject that appears to be very boring and very practical, then then feel free. So overall, Cancer, it is a day that looks pretty good to me, but you have to be aware that when the moon moves into your sign, it does make a square to Saturn and Neptune. And so this probably particularly applies if you're in the Americas, because it's sort of this morning the moon moves into Cancer, or might be sort of by lunchtime at the latest, early afternoon at the latest. So very much within the working day that the moon moves into Cancer, makes a square to Saturn, makes a square to Neptune, and that aspect or that movement does create some tension and some dis-ease, but that's not necessarily a problem. It's quite motivating, that moon square Saturn, and as the moon goes into Cancer, you feel stronger, but you also feel that there is an obligation for you to do something, to present something, and you might want to be quite pushy. You might feel that a point has to be expressed, and this is something you very much can do, because it's not just the moon is square Saturn, it's the fact that Mercury is sextile Mars. So don't be afraid of being assertive, and that particularly applies if you're working today, or if you have any sort of control over other people. If you have a position of responsibility, there are people working under you, or you're at a higher level of whatever hierarchy you're in to other people, you can be very clear, and I think that people will respect you, they'll listen to you, and they'll appreciate your authority. Leo, it could be quite a high energy day. We do have, after all, a sextile between Mercury and Mars. Mercury is still in Leo. Well, it's actually an early Leo, and it's making a sextile to Mars. So there are lots of things you can say, and your ability to express yourself should be very good. And at the same time, Leo, you're going to have a lot of energy, potentially huge amounts of energy. And so the question might be, what do you do with this energy? Where do you put it? And so there's some danger that you overdo things, you scatter it, and so if you try to do too much, you might accomplish very little and get very frustrated about it. But why should that happen? Leo, it's just very important that you decide what matters, what's important. Everything else should be put to one side, and so ideally you'll be able to really concentrate on what matters and what's important to you, and give it everything you've got. And matters are improved by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to the sun, and this moon sextile sun is going to be especially strong this morning if you're in the Americas, but if you're Australia or New Zealand, you'll have it all day, and if you're in Europe, then this morning, this afternoon, it will be there. But in the Americas, try to concentrate on the beginning of the day if you've got anything really important that you want to do, because you want to maximize the benefits, you want to maximize the advantages. So there is a lot you can do, but just don't take on too much. And if you try to do too much, then it could be a wasted day, or worse still, it could be a day which is exhausting. But that is all completely unnecessary. And so give it your best shot, and don't forget that the sun is still in Leo, and now the sun is beginning to, it's not just beginning to leave the sign. mean, it's got you you've got about 4 days left of the Sun in Leo, but it's also starting to move towards Regulus, the royal star, and the royal star is technically in Virgo now. It's processed out of Leo into Virgo, so that has been a change we've seen over the last few years, but it doesn't matter. The point is that as the Sun approaches Regulus, you gain strength from that. And remember, Regulus is the royal star. It's about connections and people you can meet who might be able to benefit you, and they could be important people, and one thinks of kings and queens, but it's not just that. It's just anyone who has influence. So if you feel that you need to get in touch with someone who is important, now might be the time to do it. And don't forget the way you yourself come across. Regulus is quite a regal influence. So now that the Sun is within 5 degrees of Regulus, in other words, it's coming into orb of Regulus, there can be something about you that is, not just larger than life, but is perhaps regal. And so do take advantage of that situation. And this goes back to all the energy you have. If you can just show how much energy and enthusiasm you have, then if you get it right, then you can be really quite an attractive and appealing person. So do take advantage of it all. Now, the moon does eventually change sign. And so the moon changing sign could slow you down, and that's why I said if you're in the Americas, try to do things as soon as possible. Try to get it out of the way this morning. Don't be complacent. But when the moon changes sign, things get slower, and you perhaps start to see things in a different way, and you become sort of more considered. And also when the moon changes sign, it makes square aspects to Saturn and Neptune. So that moon square Saturn may say something about other people and how they occur to you, and maybe you start to realize that one particular person, that they're too much of a good thing, or that they are limiting your freedom, or it just could be a passing issue with another person. Might be someone you know very well, but right now with moon square Saturn, it might not work temporarily. So possibly close relationships should be avoided today. But it's very short term. Just try to deal with people on a sort of a wider level, perhaps on a group level, or maybe not at all. Once the moon moves into Cancer, it's possible that there are just things that you want to do on your own, in your own way, and you don't necessarily need any interruptions, or you don't need any support. So you can see how the day shifts. At the beginning of the day, things are really happening, and you're going to be good company, and you've got lots to communicate. But there just comes a moment where it just becomes too much of a good thing, and you perhaps just had enough, and you want to just concentrate on something else. And maybe what really in the end matters is you and enjoying your own company. So you get the message there, Leo. It could well be a day of two halves, unless you're in Australia or New Zealand, in which case you don't have to worry about feeling separate and alone, and worrying about whether other people are a problem or not. I think you can worry about that tomorrow, but I'll be talking about that when I do your horoscope for Tuesday. Virgo. I think it's going to be quite a high energy day. We have Mercury still making a sextile to Mars, and that sextile is exact, and that is it. Mercury is now moving faster than Mars. We won't get another sextile for some time, and so with Mercury making a sextile to Mars, you're able to really give as good as you get. Your verbal skills are going to be excellent. You'll know how to express yourself. You'll know what to say, and additionally, you will understand the subtleties. Whatever currents are running under the surface, you'll be able to pick up on them, and so you're going to be quite perceptive, in terms of what you say, and you'll have a good understanding of other people's motivations, and additionally, you won't be forgetting yourself and your own interests. The moon is making a sextile to the sun. So we've got two sextiles. We've got Mercury sextile Mars. We've got moon making a sextile to the sun. And so moon sextile sun does give you an opportunity to think about what is important to you and to define your own interests. That's especially this morning if you're in the Americas. By this afternoon, that sextile won't really be operational. The moon will move into Cancer, and that will bring new opportunities and challenges. But if you're in other parts of the world, that moon sextile sun is going to be a feature of most of the day, and quite possibly all of the day. And so if there's something you want to advocate for with moon sextile sun, then it should all come together very well for you. And then the moon moves into Cancer. Now, moon moving into Cancer is of particular interest if you're in the Americas, because the moon will move into Cancer this morning if you're in California or Oregon or British Columbia. It'll be sort of around lunchtime on the East Coast. And so with the moon moving into Cancer, that does change the emphasis. It does maybe make you less focused and less ambitious, but perhaps you're thinking about other things which may be just as important. You may be thinking about what it is that you want, what it is that you'd like to happen. And when the moon moves into Cancer, it starts making a conjunction to Jupiter and a conjunction to Venus, and those conjunctions, they won't be there until tomorrow or even the day after, but they're going to be getting stronger. And so with the moon moving into Cancer, your social skills should improve, and you'll be able to get on with most people. And so don't hold back. If there are people you want to meet, especially late in the day, then I think that you very much can. And there's always a danger when you spend a lot of time with other people that you lose touch with yourself and what is important to you and your own interests. But in this case, I don't think that's a problem, because right now Virgos do have a strong sense of not just what is important to them, but also their own freedom. Yeah, freedom really does matter. And you're not going to want to be held back, and you're not going to put yourself in a situation where you are held back. So, yeah, you can enjoy people's company. You can be part of a group, even part of a team, but it needn't impact your freedom of action. Now, of course, if your freedom of action is threatened or constrained, then you will be able to react very quickly. And your actions can resolve the matter in no time at all. And additionally, Virgo, there may be moments over the course of the day when you realize that something isn't the problem you thought it was. And so that might have been happening. You might have been worried about something, and you thought it was going to hold you back, and you weren't sure about it. And then you realize that it's nothing like as bad as you thought. And so there could be at times today a sense of relief that things really are straightforward, and that what used to be a problem for you has now disappeared, and that you're actually much freer than you realized. And finishing with relationships, the moon moving into Cancer strikes me as being pretty good for relationships, in the end. So when the moon moves, the first thing that happens when the moon moves into Cancer is it makes a square to Saturn, and moon square Saturn is not great, but it's quite a short-lived aspect. And so with the moon square Saturn, something might be holding you back, something might be holding another person back. But if you feel that kind of tension, don't worry about it. You can go through with it, and it just might be something temporary. And then the moon moves on, and it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. It makes over the next couple of days, and that moon conjunct Jupiter, it's a great aspect anyway. It's made even greater by the fact that the moon is going to then make a conjunction to Venus. So over the next day or two, I think that the situation with relationships should get better and better, and you're perhaps going to be more easygoing, and the other person as well is going to be more open and forthcoming. So over the next couple of days, relationships look like an area that is going to work pretty okay. Libra. At the moment, Libra, we have the moon transitioning from Gemini to Cancer. And for most of the day, possibly, moon is going to be in Gemini. It does depend on your time zone. If you're in the Americas, then by lunchtime the moon will be in Cancer, but first half of the day in Gemini. And so moon in Gemini, it's an okay placement for the moon from a Libran view, especially as the moon is making a sextile to the sun. So moon sextile the sun means that you can, by and large, have a good time. You feel calm. You'll be able to do largely what you want, and you'll be able to say what you want. And that is an important theme of the day. Mercury making a sextile to Mars, and the sextile is very fortunate. It's very communicative, and you in particular, Libra, throughout the day, if there's something bothering you, be open about it. Don't hold back. Now, as a Libran, you might want to hold back because you'd be afraid of upsetting someone. You want harmony, and if you're too strident, that might cause problems, but it won't cause a problem. Don't worry. And so that is an important feature of the day. You being honest about what you feel and what you think, and eventually the moon goes into Cancer. And moon moving into Cancer, well, it could happen as early as this morning. It could happen as late as tomorrow. But when the moon moves into Cancer, that does matter. And one reason it matters is because Venus and Jupiter are already in Cancer. They've had their conjunction, but that conjunction is separating. So you might think that it's losing its power. It's not really losing its power. I mean, Venus and Jupiter are still pretty close to one another. And, Venus and Jupiter, two very fortunate planets in Cancer, a high-profile sign in your chart. So, it's about what you want, where you're going. It's about your ambitions. And, it is a time to be thinking about what you want. And, not being shy talk about your aims and goals for the future. And then, when the moon moves into Cancer, it becomes much clearer because the moon is joining Venus and Jupiter in Cancer. But the moon does make a square to Saturn and a square to Neptune. And so with that moon square Saturn, moon square Neptune, you might be ambitious, but you're also aware of forces that might be confusing you. Maybe people that are confusing you. Maybe certain people are not being helpful. And the moon, when it moves into Cancer, it makes a square to Saturn, makes a square to Neptune. Tomorrow it makes a square to Mars. And so that does need some thought, maybe even needs some work. So yes, things are looking good for you. You can, achieve your ambitions. But, in the short term, late today, into tomorrow, there could be some uncertainty. There could even be a bit of unpleasantness, or at least you might feel that things are difficult, and you might think that there's opposition. But don't worry if you're reaching a point where you think that it's all for nothing. You have to allow the moon to keep going, because the moon, having made those difficult squares to Mars and Saturn, whether it's today or tomorrow, it moves on. And over the next couple of days, the moon is making the conjunction to Venus and Jupiter. And as far as I'm concerned, those are really good aspects. And they really bring that Venus-Jupiter conjunction back into line. And so, get ready for an opportunity that perhaps you'd already thought you'd missed it, but you haven't missed it. And so, the first few days, the first half of the week, certainly between now and Wednesday, while the moon is moving through Cancer, and the moon is moving through Cancer until the 20th. So that's certainly through till Wednesday. Things are going to improve, and so that really does matter for you. And at the same time, you'll have no difficulty being yourself. You don't have to worry about what other people are thinking, and you also have a chance to really understand what certain people are all about. And there is a question, some people might appear to be a problem, but are they really a problem? And with Mercury making a sextile to Mars, it's a time to be talking, but also a time to be listening. There can be a great exchange of information, and through this exchange of information, you can get to know another person much better. Doesn't mean to say you're going to like them, but you can know them. And once you know a person, then you can start making decisions about what role you want them to have in your life. Scorpio, it's easy for people to underestimate you. You may not be giving much away, and you might be sort of keeping your thoughts to yourself. You're not discussing your plans. You're just doing things, your way. And you have a system, and you probably know what needs to be done, and certain things are starting to make sense. They hadn't made sense in the past, but now it's coming together, and you clearly know, you know what you want, and you are going to proceed with your ambitions. And I just don't think you necessarily need anyone's help. Why would you need anyone's help? Once the target is in sight, you just get on with it. And additionally, Scorpio, we've got a sextile aspect between Mercury and Mars. This sextile, I've been going on and on about it, but it's real and it's exact today. And with this sextile between Mercury and Mars, it's tempting to interpret the Mercury sextile Mars as being about communication. And in many cases, it is about communication. People talking with great enthusiasm. But for you, I'm not convinced. I think that this Mercury sextile Mars might be more about the mind rather than what you're saying. And so your mind with this Mercury sextile Mars is going to be very busy. There's going to be a lot of things that you're thinking about and you're wondering about, and no one's really going to know how active your mind really is. And so that puts you at a real advantage. You can hide, and people can speculate about what you want or what you're doing, but are they going to get it right? Not necessarily. And so this does mean, Scorpio, that you're going to be able to proceed with whatever your plans are, and I don't think there'll be much opposition or any opposition. And in a competitive situation, Scorpio, I don't think that you will be regarded as a threat, and indeed you might be seen as someone who has a generally quite positive influence, and that's something you can play up. You, at the moment, Scorpio, have a good understanding of what everyone wants, and you understand what people aspire to, and you don't conflict with this, and you indeed can voice it. So some of the things you say, if you feel you have to say anything, you can say things which support other people's egos, and you can just come over as someone who is reasonable and is optimistic, but without being crazily optimistic. And so you just fit in, and that does give you an advantage, because no one really knows what you're doing and what you're thinking. Now, there is a change at some stage when the moon moves into Cancer. So the moon will move into Cancer this morning if you're in California or the west coast of America, or even sort of somewhere like Montana, Mountain Standard Time. You'll move into the moon will move into Cancer. Now, it could be much later that the moon moves into Cancer. It might not be until tomorrow. So, when the moon does move into Cancer, when it eventually moves into Cancer, that does bring something of a change. You perhaps become more optimistic. You're already quite optimistic, but I think you become more optimistic, and you perhaps become less calculating, and you feel that there's less risk, especially once the moon really gathers strength in Cancer. So when the moon moves into Cancer, it does, to begin with, make a square to Saturn, square to Mars, and square to Neptune. So as Monday moves into Tuesday, you might want to sort of batten down the hatches and really concentrate on what is important to you. But then you start to sort of open up, and as you move into Tuesday, Wednesday, the moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter and Venus, and you start to see possibilities, and you can be genuinely positive about everything, and you might get in touch with new things which you have been in the past struggling to get in touch with, but now it's all there. It's all available for you, to you. And additionally, with the Sun making a biquintile to Neptune, you might get a sense of purpose that just wasn't there before. It will all become clear, and perhaps things have happened maybe by chance. There seem to be weird coincidences, and it will become clear what you're trying to do, and then it will be up to you to put it into practice, through your own conscious efforts. Sagittarius. for the first part of the day, I mean, maybe the whole day if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is moving through Gemini, and Gemini is your opposite sign. So there continues to be an emphasis on other people and having to deal with other people and their needs, or at least being aware of other people and their needs. Just because people have needs doesn't mean you have to answer them, doesn't mean you have to give them what they want, but you can certainly be aware of it all. And the moon in late Gemini does make a sextile to the sun, and I think that sextile to the sun looks pretty fortunate to me, and it does indicate that other people can be a bonus in your life. Okay, not everyone is a bonus, but there are people there who can enrich you, at least in an inspirational way, and they can put you in touch with new ways of looking at the world. You shouldn't feel that everything is static, or that you have got all the answers. Sagittarius is quite a philosophical sign. You may be able to look at the world in many different ways, but you haven't got all of the answers. And if you were to sort of do things on your own, then you might get stuck. So that is perhaps a warning. If you think that it's all down to you and that you don't need any outside help, then I think that there are going to be limits to how much you can achieve. And so if you're stuck on something, do get some help, get some advice, because that help and advice with that moon sextile sun will be forthcoming. And you have to be aware that you might be told something that you weren't ready for, that you hadn't appreciated. So, it is important, Sagittarius, to be open-minded. And it is something of a generalization to say that every Sagittarian is open-minded. That is not necessarily the case. Sagittarians can be very opinionated. They feel they've worked it all out, and they've got an idea, they've developed their idea, and they're going to hold firm to that idea. But don't be too rigid, and don't think that just because something has been worked out in the past that that's the way it's always going to be, because that is not the case. And the moon does change sign. It moves into Cancer, and when the moon moves into Cancer, it makes a square to Saturn, and it makes a square to Neptune. So moon moving into Cancer, is a real change. And to begin with, it might not feel that it's a positive change. So whenever that sign change is, it could be whether it's this morning in Americas or tomorrow in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, your first impulse might be to think that things are not getting better. However, as the moon moves into Cancer and gets past the square to Saturn and Neptune, it does make the conjunction to Venus and Jupiter. Of course, Jupiter is your ruler, and already you can feel the first influence of a moon making that conjunction to Jupiter, and Venus is already conjunct Jupiter. So overall, looking at the beginning of a week, say up until Wednesday, even Thursday, there's going to be an overall feeling that things are getting better, and you perhaps will start to see things in a new way. I mean, that requires some reflection, and you mustn't just be looking at things on the surface, but when you actually get deep down into what's happening, you'll perhaps see something at work that wants you to be happy, wants you to be successful. Capricorn. At first, I don't think that there is a great deal happening today. In fact, maybe nothing is going to be happening at all. And that might be a good thing. I mean, if you were to be out there, trying to be with people, trying to understand them, then you might not make much progress. There is a lot of confusion out there. No one really knows what's going on, and if you spend too much time with another person, then you might start feeling confused yourself. So that would indicate that the best approach is to do things your way, and not feel any great obligation to be sociable. And if you are able to have time on your own over the course of a day, then I would have said that you'll feel happy and satisfied. It should be the case that things are working and you can get a lot done. And if there has been any particular problem that has been bugging you, then now might be a chance to really sort of get to the bottom of the matter. And we do have a sextile between Mercury and Mars. I've been talking quite a lot about this sextile, and this sextile does allow you to be quite incisive. You can really look at something and look at it in great detail and really understand what's going on. And this might apply to some of your ambitions, what you're trying to create for yourself. And there could have been the odd hurdle, but now if you really focus, things will start to make sense. And if you do want to share your day with other people, then you have to be prepared for a bit of uncertainty, and also not everyone is going to be helpful. I mean, that is because the moon is starting to make a square to Saturn, and then the moon moves into Cancer. That sounds great, moon in Cancer, moon in its own sign, but the trouble is when the moon moves into Cancer, makes a square to Saturn, makes a square to Neptune. And as I've already indicated, when you're with other people, there is a lot of uncertainty, and you may find that to begin with, other people can be very frustrating. But there is a place for patience. The moon moves through Cancer, and it does make a square to Saturn. It makes a square to Neptune. It makes a square to Mars. Tomorrow, and so that doesn't look great. This build up to this T square. Moon in Cancer, square Mars, square Saturn. That does indicate that other people. Hell is other people, isn't it? Jean-Paul Sartre said that. But then, looking forward into the first part of a week up until Wednesday and into Thursday, things do improve on a social level, because the moon is applying to a conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. And of course the moon is going to be in Cancer. It's going to be in your opposite sign, so you're going to have moon, Venus, Jupiter in Cancer. And that shows that if you handle things in the right way, if you make the right choices, that other people in the end can provide you with what you're looking for. But you do have to be patient. Just because your first attempts to socialize don't work doesn't mean that hell is other people. There are people out there who can be helpful, and it's not just about being helpful. It's not just about anything transactional. In the end, there could be an emotional side to things, and by Wednesday, relationships of all kinds could show a different side to themselves, and you'll realize that you don't have to do everything on your own. Aquarius. We've had the moon moving through Gemini for a couple of days, and that hopefully has worked for you. We've had this sort of grand trine going on between a moon in Gemini, Mars in Libra. We've had Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini. So things have been moving, perhaps moving quite quickly, at least on a mental level. And you hopefully have had lots of ideas, and you've seen what is possible. But at the same time, you've seen what is difficult. And what may not work. And the question is, if something's not going to work, why is it not going to work? And one reason might be neglect. You have an idea, it looks great, and then what? And you neglect it, and the idea just shrivels and dies. And it's not because of a lack of inspiration. It's just because you weren't able to see things through, and that might be the challenge. As the moon moves out of Gemini, that's a sort of fun sign for the moon to be in, and moves into Cancer. The challenge is to work on it, to ask yourself, what actually needs to be done. And when the moon moves into Cancer, the first thing it does is it makes a square to Saturn, and so moon square Saturn is not the greatest of aspects, at least on the surface, but it forces you to look at what's in front of you and to see what work needs to be done, to see what organization needs to be done. And it's a pain. It really is. It's just not something you want to do. And additionally, with moon square Saturn, you might feel that you're not getting any support. And if you're not getting any support and you feel your inspiration levels are dropping, you might just give up on something. But that would be a shame. And additionally, you shouldn't feel that you have to do everything on your own. One aspect we have is a sextile between the moon and the sun. The sun is, of course, ruler of Leo, your opposite sign. And so with moon sextile sun, that means that support is there for you. And the sun is still there. It's still in Leo. And it's going to be in Leo for the next 4 days. And the sun is moving towards a conjunction of Regulus, the royal star. And that may indicate the power and energy of other people, and maybe also their importance. So maybe it's a time to be seeking out important people who have influence, maybe people who can help you, get your ideas off the ground. Pisces. We've had the moon moving through Gemini, and in the Pisces chart, Gemini is quite a sort of introspective sign. It likes to focus on security and making sure that everything is grounded, and it's not necessarily, Gemini is not a necessarily very exciting sign in the Pisces horoscope, but hopefully you can get things together. You have perhaps been able to decide, what is important to you. And, once you've decided what's important for you, then you can, move to the next stage and start to give it more of your effort. And so what happens is that the moon leaves Gemini and it moves into Cancer. And so when the moon moves into Cancer, overall, that's a pretty good thing, because Venus and Jupiter are in Cancer. So you're going to have 3 planets in Cancer. But as you get that sign change, Moon makes a square to Saturn, makes a square to Neptune. There may be a moment of, I won't say hopelessness or despair, that's too extreme, but just a feeling that things are not working, that there's no point. And so if you have that feeling, today, perhaps even into tomorrow, don't take it too seriously. It's just a passing phase, and you need to allow that feeling to just to settle and then move on. And then as you move into Tuesday, Wednesday, the moon will move away from that square to Saturn. It will move away from a square to Mars. So this is talking about things bothering you. You feel that things just can't work, and then suddenly the clouds will clear, and that's because the moon is making a conjunction to Venus and Jupiter by Wednesday, and that's a great aspect. By Tuesday, Wednesday, moon making the conjunction to Venus and Jupiter, and you just start to see what is possible, and you start to have real belief in yourself. And once you start having a belief in yourself, then everything will be reciprocated. So first impressions shouldn't count for much. So just because you believe that nothing is possible, but everything is stuck, doesn't mean the way that's going to be always the case. Definitely not always the case. And what you can do today is to really think carefully about where your perceptions and cognitions come from, and start to plan things and start to think about what is possible, and you be realistic. And realistic, it's important to be realistic. And realistic means that you don't just bring yourself down to earth. It means you can elevate yourself through realism as well, because through your planning you start to see what is possible. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 46, which is pushing upward. I mean, it's a pretty good hexagram. It's very dynamic. We want to make progress, and it's not pushing upward. It's not talking about necessarily the result, but we are moving forward, and it's okay to take things slowly, and not to be in too much of a hurry. But if we go about things in the right way, we've got the second line from the bottom moving. Then if we have to be aware of our limitations. But if we are honest about what we can and cannot do, if we even if we feel that it's something that is not entirely us, we don't feel necessarily comfortable with it, but we're doing it with a good heart, and we're doing it with humility, and then we make a reasonable amount of progress. And then the fourth line moves, and that means that we get feedback, we get positive feedback, and we get well received. And whatever we're doing, it starts to get favourable attention. So definitely we are making progress, but it's not about making spectacular progress. And that's reinforced by the hexagram this moves to, because this moves to hexagram number 62, which is preponderance of the small. So we should be happy with small gains. We certainly shouldn't be, flying too high. That's one thing I Ching says. If a bird flies too high, then the hunters can see it and might shoot it down. We don't want that. And, we certainly don't want to take on too much. We need to take on a small burden, a burden that's just easy to carry. And, the larger burdens can wait for later. We just don't have the strength. We don't have the opportunity. But, with that approach, not being too ambitious, it can be, quite just a solid Monday. And now I want to finish with Putin and Aleksandar Vučić, who is the president of Serbia. And I've already looked at Alaska, and I've looked at some of the horoscopes relating to Alaska. I didn't know when the meeting was going to start, but I do know when Putin landed, and so let's look at Putin's landing chart. This does matter, because this is the first time for quite a long time that Putin has not been in America for some time, and there's been sort of no personal contact between Putin or Biden, just since 2021, I think. And so now we've got Trump, who is more amenable to a meeting, and so the landing chart is, I make it that it was at 10:55 in the morning, on August the 15th. So the question is this a good chart for Putin's arrival? And sort of Mars was exactly rising, and that is certainly interesting. I mean, this is quite an aggressive action, even though Mars is, Mars is in Libra. It's not the greatest place for Libra, and you'll notice that Mercury is exactly sextile Mars, and so perhaps that's the point. This is a meeting where Putin flies in to make his position very clear. And you can, I think it was said that, in the limousine when he went off with Trump, he was doing most of the talking. And you say that's Mercury sextile Mars. This is a time for Putin to do a lot of talking. And Mercury was sextile the ascendant, and it was noticed that Putin was talking to Trump in English when they first met. And Putin, he knows English. I don't know how well he knows English, but that might say something. It's all about Mercury, and in terms of the final statements at the end of the meeting, it was Putin that went first. So we see Mercury sextile Mars, through and through with this. And look at Jupiter. Jupiter's in the 10th house, fairly close to the midheaven, making that conjunction to Venus. And so I think that boded well for his meeting, for his touchdown. And then the moon is making a sextile to Venus. And so the moon in the 8th house, it's in Taurus, but in the 8th, you can see the planning there. And as I mentioned, we have Saturn sextile Uranus. And I think that worked. Russia is very connected with the Saturn-Uranus cycle, as I've said in several videos, and Putin's career is affected by the Saturn-Uranus cycle. And so with Saturn sextile Uranus, this is about formalizing the change that Russia has brought about. This old sort of, what do they call it? The rules-based order, and Europe is the way it is, and the the 1991 boundaries are as they are, but things have changed because of Russia's invasion, and so Saturn sextile Uranus is sort of fixing them. So those are a few thoughts. I didn't want to say anything else, except I think it's very interesting that the Sun at 23 degrees 12 Leo, as I pointed out, is exactly on Russia's ascendant. Assuming we take the 7:35 p.m. as a time, and so that could be a sort of a new beginning for Russia. And if you look at the Western press, they're saying, "Oh, Putin is a pariah." Well, Putin is a pariah in the West, in Western countries, and Australia and so on. He's not a pariah in the whole world. That's what the Western press is sort of like to say, but he's not. He's only a pariah in certain places. And with the Sun conjunct ascendant, Russia's ascendant, the general consensus seems to be that the meeting went quite well for Putin. And I think that is confirmed by the astrology. And now I want to turn to Serbia. I've never been to Serbia. The closest I've got to Serbia is Slovenia. So I think there's a lot to take on board. I was looking at the biography of Aleksandar Vučić, and it's very complicated, and Serbia is complicated, and I was wondering whether I really had anything useful to say. And one probably has to start, perhaps not with Vučić, but instead with Serbia. And the question is, what chart do you take for Serbia? You've got 13th century charts for Serbia. You've got very modern charts for Serbia. I think that the latest chart is July the 5th, 2006, when it was separated from Montenegro. Is that right? But I think that when you're dealing with certain charts, like, for example, the chart of Ireland, with the Easter Rising, when the Irish rose up against the British, in the first instance, it was an unsuccessful rebellion in 1916, but it was the beginning. And likewise with the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, 1776. Well, the day came and went. It was still by and large controlled by the British, but it was the beginning of something. And you might say the same thing for Serbia. And one possible date for Serbia is 1804, which is I think this is called the First Serbian Uprising, which took place on February the 15th, 1804. So it was under Turkish domination, and there was some breakaway Turkish, Turkish region of Serbia. It's still controlled by the Turks, and there was an uprising against it. Now, the uprising in the end was unsuccessful, but it was the beginning. And I do think that this chart, probably is important. Was it at 6 a.m.? I'll be honest, I got that 6 a.m. from, there was an article on Reddit, but it was saying but it took place in, forgive the pronunciation, in Kragujevac in Serbia. I don't know whether that is true. I don't know whether I don't know how seriously we can take the 6 a.m. time, but I think we can certainly say February the 15th, 1804, is a possible start date for Serbia. It's just one chart, don't forget that. And it would be sort of fitting if sort of Neptune is, it would be that 6 a.m. time kind of looks good because Neptune is on the midheaven. You have ideas about where your country is going, where the rebellion is going. You've got Mars on the ascendant. You've got a Mercury-Mars conjunction, and so that sort of fits. And Serbia has had a really dramatic history, and it's been at war a lot. It's been attacked a lot. It's been invaded a lot. It's been put under a lot of pressure. And of course, Serbia became Yugoslavia for a time, with its capital in Belgrade, and Yugoslavia was sort of ravaged by the Nazis. I think was it something like 20% of it? Was it 20% of the population were killed? I mean, it was a total disaster. The Second World War for Yugoslavia, and I think that Serbia chart of 1804 is going to say something about Yugoslavia. And as a test, as a check on this, I thought I would compare Serbia's chart with that of Nazi Germany, who sort of invaded Yugoslavia in 1941, I think. Was it 1940? Yeah, it was 1941. And so, if you compare the chart of Serbia with Nazi Germany, you see that Nazi Germany's Saturn. This is when Hitler came to power. So this is the chart of Nazi Germany on January the 30th, 1933. So you can see that Nazi Germany's Saturn was on Serbia's Mars, and so that's a check to see if this chart is working. And I would have said Saturn conjunct the Mars is quite an important aspect. Saturn destroying Serbia militarily, and everything else that it did, and and it's just the Mercury, that Saturn Mercury hitting Serbia's Mars. So that works, and Serbia has had other issues. There's been a determination. The Germans haven't really given up on Serbia, have they? Or the Germans, through the European Union and through NATO, you could say that NATO has been doing whatever it can to sort of break Serbia. With the 1999 bombing campaign, which it's kind of weird, isn't it? That it was all about Kosovo. That Serbia was not allowed to say that Kosovo was an integral part of Serbia. Yet there's this double standards, isn't there? That Ukraine can say, Donetsk is part of Ukraine. We should, so we're supposed to respect Ukraine there, but we're not allowed to respect Serbia in terms of its control over Kosovo. So there is this double standards that the West likes to go through, and additionally with Serbia, you've got its connection to the European Union, and so this, I mean, because we're just about to talk about Vučić, and Vučić is he seems to want to have his cake and eat it, but with the European Union, when we're seeing these protests in Serbia, we don't know who's behind these protests. I mean, some of them I'm sure are very sort of legitimate, and perhaps as a result of that corruption and the train station disaster on November the 1st, 2024. But if you compare Serbia, the Serbian chart, if we take that 1804 chart and you compare that chart with the European Union's chart, with the EU, what is the European Union doing to it? Okay, we've got Saturn in Aquarius. It's interesting, both Nazi Germany and the European Union, I'm taking the Treaty of Maastricht, have Saturn in Aquarius, and Saturn is right on Serbia's sun. So Serbia has the sun at 25 Aquarius. Saturn is on Serbia's sun, so it's not great. And the European Union when the Treaty of Maastricht came into being, the European Union had Moon opposition Mars, opposition Pluto, square Saturn. So that T-square, that violence of the European Union, the European Union has a absolutely horrible chart. I mean, if you'd seen the European Union, you'd treat it as a person, you'd regard the European Union, it has a chart of a serial killer. There are links. If you compare the European Union's chart with Charles Manson or Brian Koberger, you can see similarities. So there is something quite monstrous about the horoscope of the European Union, and that hits poor Serbia's sun. There's that T-square, and there's Serbia's sun. If we take that 1804 chart, so a lot of people in Serbia, they might want to be part of the European Union, including Vučić, but it's not going to work for Serbia. European Union is not Serbia's friend, for sure. And you think about Vučić being corrupt. Everyone's saying how corrupt he was, but you can be corrupt in Europe. You can get away with it, and you look at Bulgaria. Bulgaria is just adopting the euro. It's quite clear that it's not in ordinary people in Bulgaria's best interest to adopt the euro, but they're doing it anyway because there are certain groups of oligarchs who want this to happen, and Europe is quite happy to go with it. So, Europe, decides who is corrupt and who is not corrupt, who it wants to sort of single out and attack. And so we have to see that in terms of the demonstrations in Belgrade. There is an idea that is it just a sort of a colour revolution? It's been compared with the Ukraine. Of course, the Ukraine colour revolutions were very much supported by the West and NGOs in the West, and it's a similar thing in Serbia. Could well be the similar thing in Slovakia. So one shouldn't just think that these colour revolutions are just a spontaneous expression of popular will. They aren't necessarily. Which brings us on to the horoscope of Vladimir Vučić. I've no idea whether he was really born at 1 p.m. That's the time that has been given for him. It gets a C on the Rodding rating, so I don't think we can be 100% sure, but I put up the 1 p.m. chart anyway. And so he's been president for a long time, since 2015, and I think he was prime minister before that. So he's kind of dominated Serbian politics for a considerable period of time. And when anyone is in power for that long, inevitably he's going to be accused of being corrupt and horrible and everything else, the devil incarnate. And you see that around Europe. You look at Macron, you look at Starmer. It's not exactly unusual, and so one should not be surprised. And so looking at his chart, what evidence do we have that he is supposedly an awful person? Well, I don't know whether he's an awful person or not. He's a Pisces. And, with a Pisces, Pisceans, well, okay, if you think about Piscean politicians, Gordon Brown in the UK or Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, they can be quite slippery, and they can sort of keep moving, and they kind of want to hedge their bets. And this is perhaps what Vučić is doing. He's trying to play this sort of balancing act. He's trying to be supportive of the European Union because he wants to be a member of the European Union, but he doesn't want to fall out with Russia. And and he went to Moscow quite recently, and so he's trying to be all things to being all people. And there's a difference between being a Pisces and a Libran, because superficially Libra and Pisces do have something in common there. They like to they don't want to say no. They want to be friends of everyone, and so and that can be a problem. But I think with Pisces, there is an emotional side to it here, and I think that Vučić, he kind of knows where things are going in terms of his sensitivity, the way his feelings are working, and he knows how problematic it is, and he's probably aware of the shifts that are going. And as I've said for years, we are seeing, a slow, perhaps a breakdown of Europe and European values. That you can't ignore Russia. Russia is not like it was in 1999, was powerless to help Serbia. Things have changed, and Russia is on the ascendancy now. And I've been arguing that since 2020, since before the invasion of Ukraine, ever since the Jupiter-Saturn cycle and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. And so perhaps with his sun Venus in Pisces, he's aware of that, and he needs to sort of keep his options open. There was that thing where Serbia voted in the United Nations to be critical of Russia. Then they had to apologize. They didn't mean it, or did they mean it? So it's all rather complicated. So why does Aleksandar Vučić, why is he in power for so long? And I don't find his chart especially impressive. I mean, he has Mars in Aries. That's quite strong, Mars in Aries, and so he knows how to look after himself. And additionally, he's got Venus opposition Pluto. That would indicate someone who is potentially quite manipulative. Well, I suppose you'd have to be manipulative there. And he has Jupiter opposition Saturn. Now, that Jupiter opposition Saturn is very close. And there's going to be a Jupiter opposition Saturn in 2029, in a few years' time. And you might argue that if he can hang on until the Jupiter-Saturn opposition, he will be on familiar territory. That's what he's familiar with. And Jupiter-Saturn opposition is going to be about some kind of breakdown, certainly an economic breakdown, I think, in Europe, maybe in America as well. And the economy is going to be in pieces, and so one wonders how he's going to relate to that. To that. But in the short term, Jupiter opposition Saturn, could be a problem for him, and it could undermine him. That's for sure. Mercury, we don't know what sign his Mercury is in. It probably has got his Mercury in Aquarius. It could be in Pisces. Now, if you look at Serbia's chart, you get some kind of idea about why he has. No, that's the bridge collapse. So let's look at Serbia. If we look at the Serbia 1804 chart, and we compare that with Vučić. So we've got we have got Serbia in the middle, and we've got Vučić on the outer wheel. And so here is Vučić's Jupiter. He has his Jupiter at 5 degrees 41 Scorpio. Now on February the 15th, 1804, Jupiter was at 5:45 Scorpio. So he has his Jupiter exactly conjunct Serbia's Jupiter. And so that gives him, I would have said, a great deal of power in Serbia. Jupiter is about how Serbia wants to expand its aspirations. You may hate the man, but you have to ask, why is he in power for so long? And look at his Venus. His Venus is at 24 Pisces. And Serbia's Venus is at 24 Pisces, or Serbia has it, or 25 Pisces. So his Venus is conjunct Serbia's Venus, and his Jupiter is conjunct Serbia's Jupiter. And I think that that might explain why he's been so successful, and indeed why he may continue to be so successful. So, even if he loses the presidency, well, what happens next? Is he going to just disappear? Well, not necessarily, because he does have that powerful connection to his country, and also, look at, he has his moon at 13 Aquarius. It's conjunct Serbia's Mercury-Venus conjunction in Aquarius. So that does perhaps give him staying power. And as far as I know, what really did his presidency in was the collapse of the railway station. For some reason, I've said bridge. Can I just? I don't know why I was thinking of the bridge. Let me just remove bridge. Let's just call it collapse. So there is a chart for the collapse, and so this was obviously a devastating event, not just because 16 people were killed, but it led to all sorts of allegations about corruption, and of course a lot of those allegations landed on Vučić's doorstep. And so, at the time of this accident, there was a fairly close, Mars was opposition Pluto. We just had a really quite unpleasant Scorpio new moon, and Uranus was on Algol, so it's not great, is it? And then you've got the question of what was it doing to Serbia? I'm not saying it's doing a huge amount to Serbia, but Serbia's Uranus was at February the 15th, 1804, was at 15 Libra, and Black Moon Lilith was on Serbia's Uranus, so that really didn't help, did it? And if the first Serbian uprising really did happen at 6 in the morning, then you'd have Pluto close to the ascendant, and you'd have Uranus on the descendant and opposition Neptune. But I don't think we know that for sure. And then there's the question of what did it do to Vučić? And so here is. Here's Vučić's chart, and here is the collapse. So the South Node was on his Uranus, and so that really didn't help. And Saturn was on his North Node, so it was it wasn't great. And if he has Cancer rising, Mars, if he really has got Cancer rising, then Mars had just crossed his ascendant, and so you could see how things had started to become more difficult for him. But again, we don't have a precise time. We don't necessarily know for sure that this is when he was born. So you can maybe see why things have got difficult for him, perhaps. And I think it's a chart with Vučić that one does need to look at more. And I think that in terms of Vučić, I think it's just interesting that he's a Pisces, and that may tell us a lot of what we need to know about. Oh, and one thing we do know that was happening is that Mars at the time of the collapse was at 29 degrees 3. So it was at 29 degrees 3 Cancer, and so Vučić's Mars is at 2853 Aries. So Mars had just gone square his own Mars, and Pluto. So that Mars-Pluto opposition at the time of the collapse was right on his Mars. So for him, it really hit him. And of course, he's president, he's head of the state. And so the thing is that if you have Vučić as your president, then his chart says something about the country. and so what happens to him happens to the country. So his Mars square his Mars, that would line up with this disaster at the railway station. So I'm sorry I'm not able to say more about Vučić, but there's a lot to think about, and maybe I will return to the topic. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.